The very difficult task of rebuilding our country is going to start very quickly after the war is over. In fact, Abraham Lincoln, like we already said, has started planning that. But what do we have to rebuild? Well, one, it's basically everything. Politically, we had to completely reintegrate the South into the Union, back in under the United States government, re-elect political officials. The South had to acknowledge the sovereignty of the U.S. government and their authority, so that's going to be a big challenge. Socially, there's an entire group of people who are now citizens of the United States, who are now free people. The question is, how do we integrate them into society? Economically, the South had to be completely rebuilt. That's going to be a major challenge as well. Remember, Lincoln's plan, his whole purpose in fighting this war was to preserve the Union, was to keep the Union together. That was his whole issue. It changes into fighting for the freeing of slaves once it was determined that the Union needed a higher cause or a better reason to fight for this war. So that was one of the part reasons to go ahead with emancipation. And what Lincoln wanted to create was a very forgiving peace to bind the nation, to bring us back together, to heal those wounds of our country. And the quote there was, with malice toward none and charity for all, basically saying, we're not mad at you, South. We want to help everybody and bring us back together. Lincoln's plan provided for amnesty for most, meaning that he's basically going to pardon most of the Confederate, both military personnel as well as the political personnel as well. So he's not going to charge them with a crime or the crime of treason in this case. That would have been very challenging to overcome. And he only required for 10% of those who were on the voting rolls in 1861, he was only going to require 10% of them to take an oath of loyalty. So you can see that this was a very lenient plan, and it also almost had no mention of former slaves or what we were going to do with former slaves. So you see here there's a lot of questions still up in the air about how they're going to handle all of this. The radical Republican plan was very different. First of all, Andrew Johnson, who becomes president after Lincoln is assassinated, was not Lincoln. He was definitely not the same type of man, not the same type of politician. So those radical Republicans are going to specifically oppose Johnson. And they wanted to see some extreme changes in the South and wanted to punish the South. So the leaders are going to be Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner. Now remember, Charles Sumner is that same Northern politician who was beat over the head by Preston Brooks in the Senate. So you can imagine he has some pretty strong personal feelings there. The Wade-Davis Bill of 1864 is going to be the original radical Republican plan, much harsher, that wanted to punish the South. It proposed for martial law, which is the military going in and ruling in that area. It also required for a majority of the population to take the oath of loyalty. It also barred former leaders from office. So if you had been a Confederate leader in the Confederacy, either a military or political leader, you would not be able to hold office in the new reunited nation. Now, after Abraham Lincoln is assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, you see Andrew Johnson become the president, and he tries very hard to follow Lincoln's plans with a couple of additions. So we already know the 13th Amendment that bans slavery. He's going to include that in there, but Congress is going to basically fight Johnson every step of the way. They refuse his plan, but the South is going to try to reorganize under Lincoln's plan because they realize that this would be a much easier and more lenient plan for them compared to what they were afraid the radicals had in store. In fact, I think Tennessee was the only state that was actually able to get their entire plan back together under Lincoln's plan to actually be readmitted to the Union. So the South really knew that the Lincoln's plan was going to be much better, but most of them were not able to do that. In the South, we immediately see black codes enacted. Black codes are going to be those laws that restricted the rights of blacks, basically trying to just replace those slave codes, put those same restrictions on African Americans without slavery being in place. Many of those very same leaders who had been leaders in the Confederacy are elected to office once again. And your African Americans were denied most of their rights again. So things seem to be just reverting. And many people in the Union were just wondering, why they had fought this war and lost so many people if this was just going to go back to being more of the same. So this is going to push many of those radical Republicans and support for the radical Republicans in their plan. So why again would they fight if this was just going to be more of the same? There was a major power struggle even before Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. That Wade Davis bill that I told you about that laid out that first plan, Lincoln is going to pocket veto it, meaning he just let it sit on his desk until the term of Congress ran out, meaning it was just automatically vetoed. But we see that power struggle renew with Johnson. Congress refuses to admit those new Southern delegates under Lincoln's plan, and they are then going to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Now, Andrew Johnson is going to veto that law because he said there was no constitutional basis for it. Well, Congress, those radical Republicans in Congress had enough power that they were able to override his veto and then get the 14th Amendment passed, which is going to be that constitutional basis for that Civil Rights Act of 1866. So the 14th Amendment is going to make African American citizens. It also is going to guarantee equal protection under the law. So that's going to be very important here as well. And after the midterm elections of 1866, radical Republicans gained control of Congress. So they had a large majority and are now going to be able to basically do whatever they want because they would be able to override Johnson's veto at basically every turn. So you're just going to see a continual power struggle between the president and Congress over how Reconstruction was going to go from here on out.